So the Democratic debate is well underway. I just watched the first hour of it, and I just want to give you my impressions so far. I do have it recording, so I will talk about the rest of it as I watch it. But so far, my first impressions. When they started the debate, the announcer actually said, these 10 candidates made the debate. 10 others did not make the debates because of the DNC threshold. And it was like, okay, pour some salt on the wound, guys. And they talked about how this is democracy. Then the announcer was saying these things, and the reality is it's not democracy, that there are candidates who are in the race who are not on that debate stage tonight. It is an absolute sham that there are candidates who are not there. Tulsi Gabbard is not there. She's still in the race. Steve Bullock is not there. He is still in the race. Marianne Williamson. And the list goes on with a few others that are not on that stage who are still in the race and absolutely deserve and should be, because they're in the race. We, the American people, have the right to hear from all the candidates. We, the American people, have the right to make our own choices as to who we will support, not the DNC using their arbitrary rules of who they're going to pick and choose based on the polls. And that kind of takes me to the first little bit here. As the debates went on, I will say that I noticed it started out with a lot of kind of identity. I do feel like the Democratic Party is still riding high on identity politics, which is fine. I do think that we should have an inclusive society, and I do think that there does need to be a reframing and a reshaping of what what an American looks like. I think we've all grown up, even myself as a mixed race person, grew up with this idea that an all-American boy, an all-American person is like a blonde-haired, blue-eyed person wearing cowboy boots and a flannel shirt and just kind of has that idea of what you know what I mean? The all-American envisionment is not the reality of what America looks like. America's much more brown. And so I don't mind that we are trying this reshaping. I just think that it gets a little bit when that becomes the main focus. When they start off this debate and you've got one announcer speaking Spanish, which is great. Look, a lot of people in this country speak Spanish. I want to speak Spanish because I feel like it's super useful. I live in California. And I have no problem with it. I just, and that they're doing the debate at a historically black college. All of those things are fine. I'm not against any of it. I just felt like it was definitely playing into identity a bit. And then it took us to the first person they had speak for the to give their little spiel was Leanne Castro. And I couldn't help myself. And I know maybe this is bad, but I couldn't help myself to think as he was there, and he was the last person to make the cutoff for the debates. He finally did get his fourth qualifying poll, and they used, the DNC used arbitrary qualifying. They chose randomly which polls they were going to use as qualifying polls. They threw out a bunch of other polls that they decided were not, even though those polls were equally as valid. And Leanne Castro did make that final poll, which allowed him to be on the debate stage. And I thought, as there was the announcer, Jorge, who did he spoke half in Spanish, and they kind of seemed to be on this identity politics wave, it did make me think, did they kind of rig it to have Leanne Castro make this debate because they don't want to cut out the one Hispanic guy? I mean, I know Beto has the name Beto, but we all know Beto's not really Beto. He's Robert. But Leanne Castro is genuine, he's an actual Hispanic man. And it kind of made me wonder, did they couldn't cut him out. It would look bad for the party. Certainly, I don't think he's more popular than Tulsi Gabbard by any means, yet he's there on the debate stage tonight. I have nothing against Leanne Castro. I think he's an excellent speaker. I felt like he did give an inspiring opening speech, but it did just make me think they just didn't want to cut him. It would have just looked bad. So, they've got a woman of color. They've got Kamala Harris. So they can kick off Tulsi Gabbard, but they can't kick out Leanne Castro. They have nobody to replace him. Beto's not convincing enough. Going down the list of the people the candidates when they gave their opening spiel, Amy Klobuchar pretty much just said, "Hey, I'm a centrist. You think people are too extreme? I'm here for you. I'm a centrist." Cory Booker gave his poor Cory Booker. He's so forgettable. He's just forgettable. I forgot what Cory had to say. Andrew Yang, I gotta say, when he gave his opening speech, he sounded very libertarian. He did say, look, I'll give you the $1,000 and how about you decide and not the government. That was a very libertarian stance. He did redeem himself as a progressive later on when because he is a supporter of Medicare for all, but we'll get into that a little bit. There was a weird crowd reaction after Andrew Yang. I'm not really sure what that was about. I'd have to go back and watch it and see if I can figure that out. And then maybe in the next video, I'll explain what that weird crowd reaction was after Andrew Yang. Pete Buttigieg then goes next and he makes an asshole comment. He then says, well, that's original. I'll give you that. I think he was talking to Andrew Yang. So that's why it felt like an asshole comment. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was reacting to the crowd, and in which case I retract my statement. But Pete Buttigieg just pretty much goes on and, that guy, I can never understand him, really. He says a lot of nonsense, a lot of flowery language, trying to sound like a politician. He does sound like a politician. He seems really pompous. I don't know about that guy. Kamala Harris, wah, wah. She sounds kind of like Charlie Brown. When she starts talking, I immediately think Charlie Brown. And then she does it again. That woman cannot get on that debate stage without bringing out a knife. She gets up there and instead of trying to be inspiring to America, saying, this is how I'm going to lead the nation, she goes on and says, let's talk about Donald Trump and how awful Donald Trump is. And she just broke out the knife and she's there to just slash people. But she ultimately ended up getting slashed a little bit in the later on, which we'll talk about, by one of the moderators, Lindsay Davis. So we'll talk about that a little bit because that was really interesting. Now, Bernie Sanders sounds like he's lost his voice a bit. He must be yelling a lot, which he tends to do. I love that he goes on there and he says, we must do more than beat Donald Trump. Yes, we must beat Donald Trump, but we need to do more than that. And then he talks about the billionaires controlling the system. Bernie Sanders is extremely inspiring when he speaks. There is no doubt about that. And that becomes even more apparent later on when he talks about Medicare for all. Elizabeth Warren, she talked about her past, growing up or trying to make it in Oklahoma and her brothers having to join the military in order to get into the middle class. She has a great story and a very typical story of how Americans make it out of poverty. And her point of all of that is it's really difficult to do today. And she's here to try to change that. And she's a great teacher. She studied to be a teacher. She ended up becoming a lawyer, but she's a great teacher. Biden, he really just says, hey, we're America and we're great and we can do great things. We just have to beat Trump and then we're going to do great things again. But he doesn't really have a plan ever. Now, going to the first question, I thought it was really great when I thought they kicked off the debate in the right way. They went straight to Biden and they said, listen, you're flanked by Warren and Bernie on both sides of you. And we want to know, do you think they are too far to the left? And he pretty much said, you know what? I want to stick to Obamacare. He plays the Obama card. I'm the Obama guy. I'm Obama 2.0. I'm here because of Obama. And he pretty much plays that. He plays that card. They were specifically talking about healthcare. So he goes on and says, look, I want to keep Obamacare, but in my plan, we're just going to take it to the next level. But it's just pretty much going to be Obamacare. Then he goes on and sounds like a Republican. And he says, what I want to know with every single thing we do is, how are we going to pay for it? How are we going to pay for it? He goes into austerity and he's just a complete Republican. So that is the problem with Joe Biden. He's a Republican. He's a Republican who's not racist, even though Kamala Harris will tell you otherwise. So maybe he's just a Republican. Now, Warren goes on. When Warren and Bernie tag team on Medicare for all, this is where the differences between these two candidates really come out. Warren is excellent, and I mean just excellent at explaining things. But Bernie Sanders is inspiring. When you listen to him talk, you want to stand up and clap. And I did on a couple of occasions. I couldn't help myself. I just thought, yes, that is right. Clap. I felt inspired when Bernie Sanders spoke. When Warren spoke, I felt like, yep, makes sense. Uh-huh, that's right. And then Bernie gets up there and he feels like a real leader. That is the real difference between those two. They would make an excellent team. They would. I think that in the end, if it's Bernie and Warren together, I think that would be a winning. I think that would bring a lot of the Democrat. I think that would bring everybody together because there's a lot of people who don't like Bernie Sanders. They're still bitter about Hillary Clinton. But because Bernie Sanders, his radical ideas from 2016 are no longer radical, and Warren has a lot of those same ideas, but people, they're still bitter about Bernie, so they've instead latched on to Warren. So there's a huge crowd that they've latched on to Warren. They were supporters of Hillary. They're bitter about Bernie. But if Warren were with Bernie and she were his VP pick, for example, then I think they would say, okay, all right, fine. I guess that's what we're going to go for. I guess, it's fine. We're going to do it. We're going to go for it. And I think that would still be an inspiring ticket that would bring out the vote. I do. Klobuchar, she says something like, oh my gosh, I read your bill, Bernie Sanders, and it says that there would be no more private insurance. Oh no, that is terrible. No more private insurance. Lady, when are you going to understand? Just like Warren said, nobody likes their insurance company. It's not about that. It's about the doctors. So if you don't have your private insurance company anymore, but your Medicare for All allows you to go to the same doctors and the same hospitals, what do you care? You don't care. You just want to be able to go to your doctor and get the care. You don't want to have to deal with your insurance company. So no more private insurance is not a bad thing. That doesn't mean your doctors go away. It just means the insurance company you've been dealing with goes away and things are automatically paid for. You don't have to deal with the headache of insurance companies anymore. Now, one thing that was brought up was the $23 billion going to doctors and researchers. $23 billion going to the insurance company, to private insurance companies. This was a rebuttal. I believe it was Bernie Sanders going back against Klobuchar, or maybe it was Warren, but they mentioned $23 billion in profits that were made by the insurance companies. And I just want to point out that $23 billion, if you want a good healthcare system, that $23 billion does not need to go to your insurance company who's not innovating a thing. That should go to the doctors and the researchers who are doing the innovation. That is what something like Medicare for All would allow. It takes away the profits for the insurance companies who are not innovating medicine, and it would incentivize instead the innovation with the doctors and the researchers. That's who should be making the money. So when people talk about eliminating private insurance and reforming the healthcare system, they get really confused and they say, oh, well, this is going to be terrible for medical innovation and terrible for research. Well, they're not making the money right now anyway. It's the insurance company. So let's put that money where it belongs. How about that? Harris, I do need to kind of rush through this here, but because I got to get back to watching this. But Harris, she kind of runs, she says, I used to be for Medicare for All, but now I have a better plan. It's the same as Buttigieg when he said it's Medicare for all who want it. If you want it, you can buy into it. If you don't want it, you don't need it. Harris says the same thing. It's basically Medicare for all who want it. That's not really going to work because ultimately your company, your boss is not going to want to have to pay for your insurance. So what's going to happen is if they know that you can get medical insurance through the government, they're just going to make you a contractor. And then you're going to have to get medical insurance through the government. That's what they're wanting to do. That's what many of the businesses are doing right now anyway. And you know what sucks about that? You might think, okay, well, then I'll get insurance through the government, so it won't matter if my employer makes me a contractor. It is a problem because you'll then have to pay for you'll have to double your taxes that you have to pay. Because right now, when you're employed by an employer, they pay half of your taxes, half of your Social Security taxes, and you pay the other half. Well, when you're self-employed as a contractor, you have to pay for all of those. So what you want is to remain employed by your employer and to incentivize your employer to not make you a contractor. The way to do that is to take the insurance off of the employer's back. Because right now the gig economy is growing because employers don't have to pay for medical insurance. But so then you get screwed over when you become a contractor, you then have to double your taxation and it's terrible. Plus you have to pay self-employment tax. So you get really screwed over. The best solution is Medicare for All. That way the employer doesn't have to pay for it. They can still employ you. You can work as an employee, get the benefits of an employee and not be a contractor. And it's not a hindrance on the employer. Another thing that I wanted to talk about is, so one thing that keeps being brought up about the Medicare for All debate, the health insurance debate, is they keep bringing up the number of people who are not covered. And that, it's more than just about getting coverage. It's not just about who's covered. Raise your hand. Okay, great. You all have health insurance. Who doesn't have health insurance? Raise your hand. Oh no, we got to do something. We got to get you covered. The one time in my life, personally, that I got screwed with medical bills, I was completely covered. I had employer insurance. I was employed by a corporation. I had Blue Cross Blue Shield insurance, fully covered, paid my premiums. Everything was fine. I ended up needing to go into the emergency room. And unfortunately, it turns out that the emergency room referred me to a cardiologist. They thought that I maybe had a heart problem. I'm fine, don't worry. And they needed to run a bunch of tests. And it turns out that that cardiologist was not covered by my insurance. I wound up with a $5,000 to $7,000 bill in my 20s that I could not pay and did not pay, and it ruined my credit. That I was covered. So it's not about coverage. It's also about affordability. It's what is going to be covered and paid for. And if the reason why that cardiologist wasn't covered for me was because apparently he was for some other insurance company, some other private insurance company. But if he was for Medicare for all, and because that's the only insurance, and I'm obviously a person under Medicare for all, then it would have been covered. That's what we want. It's not about how many people are covered. It's about the affordability of that coverage as well. The last thing, they all kind of go through it. Andrew Yang did bring up the gig economy. He mentions that. He says, I'm Asian. I know a lot of doctors. It's funny. It's an Asian joke. You're allowed to laugh. I laughed. I didn't hear a lot of laughter in the audience, and I was sitting there thinking, that's because nobody's Asian in this audience and they don't feel like they can laugh at that joke. You can laugh at it. It's fine. Anyway, he brings up the gig economy. So he mentions all this. He is for Medicare for all, even though he did sound like a libertarian in his opening statements. He is actually for Medicare for all. Booker's also for Medicare for all, it sounds like. One thing I want to bring up before I wrap this up is that in spirit, Tulsi Gabbard seemed to be on that stage tonight because Lindsay Davis, one of the moderators, wearing an all-white suit, just like Tulsi Gabbard was wearing at the last debate, goes and takes a knife out and slashed Kamala Harris. She went after her and it was like, Tulsi deja vu. That's what this feels like right now. She took out the knife and she said to Kamala Harris, you had an opportunity to make a lot of change when you were in a position of power and you didn't. So what makes us think you're going to be making changes now? And she went and cited her record the same way Tulsi Gabbard did. It was great. It was very much the channeling of Tulsi. It was nice to have that moment just because I'm sure it reminded a lot of people who are watching at home of that moment, which means that they were all reminded of Tulsi Gabbard in that moment. So that is my assessment of the first hour of the debates. There's a couple more hours to go. I'm going to go back to watching it, pop myself some popcorn and pour myself a glass of wine, I guess, and hunker down and see what else they've got to say. So I know they did mention some other things. They talked about racism. They talked about gun control. I'll get into that stuff in the next, we'll see what else we've got to talk about in the next video. So thank you so much for watching and enjoy those debates. If you're not watching, which I understand because many people are boycotting, good for you. I'm here to help fill in the gaps. So I am going to go back to it. Thanks for watching.